Hello everyone, welcome back to How to Build a Blog with Laravel. This is part 28 of our series, and in this video we're going to be learning, kind of doing a lot of the heavy lifting of the authentication, finishing up some of the authentication stuff, and before we move on to some of the password resets and stuff like that. So up to this point we've been working on our views and our routes for our authentication. We learned a little bit about authentication theory in the 2 videos ago. Now it's time to kind of tie that together and actually start logging in, logging out, registering users, and all sorts of stuff like that. So that's what this video is all about. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, welcome back, guys. So if you guys have been following along, we've been building our application basically from scratch. We started working on the authentication, and we were using the built-in Laravel authentication, right? And so we started by building our routes. We built our controller. We didn't build the controller. The controller was in there by default, but we built our routes and our views. So we already have a login page, our login form, we have a registration form, and we have all of our routes set up to support it. So let's go ahead, tie those together, see what else needs to be done to start actually logging in users and creating new users and stuff like that, okay? So in order to do this, let's go ahead. We're going to do what we always do, and we're just going to open up our project. I'm already in there, actually. So we're going to cd into our project, then open up in Sublime. Okay, you guys can use whatever text editor you want. This is just what I'm going to be using for this video as our Sublime. Okay, so what I want to show you guys in this is actually how to be doing the logging in and logging out of the users, and I think you'll be surprised at how easy it already is going to be. Okay, so let's go ahead and just launch our application on the server. I'm going to do PHP artisan serve to get that done. And here we go. We're going to launch the server, and I'm going to go ahead and just open it up in Chrome. Localhost 8000. And all right, so here's our project. We got a great website going. Currently, nothing is actually protected from users, but that's okay because all this stuff up here we want users to be able to access, right? It makes perfect sense. You want them to read your blog and stuff like that. What we're going to be locking down is what's over here on the side under My Account. Under My Account, we basically have where we can access all the posts. We can edit them, create them, and so forth. So this is going to be kind of what we want to lock down is this post section for right now. We might add other things in the future that we also want to lock down, but this is what we're going to lock down for right now. We also know that if we go to auth/register, that we created this form in the last video, and then we go to auth/login, and we created a form as well. We did all that in the last video. So now you might be asking yourself, okay, where do we go from here? How do we actually start getting the logins working and all that kind of stuff? Well, you'd actually be surprised that it's actually really simple. Remember how I said Laravel already has it built in? You actually already did a lot of the hard work in the previous video. We're just going to do a few little tweaks to make it work the way we want it to work, but you actually already got it done. Let me just show you real quick over here. If I open up SQL Pro, I've got this open right now. Just make sure I got the database refreshed, and you can see that in our users table we currently have nothing in our users table. So there's no users currently in our application. So let's go ahead and just register a new user, and let's just see if it works. So we're going to go to auth/register. I'm going to go ahead and create an account for myself. Alex Curtis. And I'm going to use the email that I give you guys, hello@jcurtis.com. You guys can email me there if you have any questions. I am really behind on emails, though. For those of you guys waiting for a response from me, I respond to all the emails. So I will reply back if you email me, but I am super, a week behind on emails. No joke. So just know that that's what's going on. But I do appreciate them. A lot of you guys are just saying thank you and stuff, and I appreciate the support. It's awesome. Okay, so, and I do try to answer if you guys have questions. Sometimes I can't, I'll do my best to help you. I can't be dedicated, I can't put 10 hours into work to help you guys, but I'll definitely do my best, try at least point you in the right direction, point you to another tutorial that might help, or just, tell you what might need to be done. So give me something simple if you guys are asking me questions. Understand I can't read through tens of thousands of lines of code to find an error for you, just because I have a lot of other stuff going on. I'd love to be able to do that, but I just don't have the capability to do that right now. So But if you have questions, I'd love to help you guys. And then all the ones just saying thanks, it's great too. I appreciate it. Moving on. So I've gone ahead and created a password here. Confirm our password, make sure it's all the same. While I was talking, I'm actually going to retype that in just to make sure I got the password that I was thinking when I typed it in. And we're going to go ahead and click register. Okay, so we click register, nothing really happened, but we did get redirected to our home page. So let's go ahead and take a look over here at our database. If we take a look at our database, we're in our users table. I'm going to click refresh. And sure enough, you can see that we've created a line in our database. So we have our name, we've got our email, we've got our password. You'll notice the password is scrambled up, and this is just because it is, this is how Laravel does it. We don't store, we talked about this in the theory video, we never store the actual password in here. We store the encrypted password. So this is the encrypted password that we would have. If I had selected remember, there would be a remember token for me right here, and then you can see that we created it on April 10th, which is going to be today, the day that the video is posted. I'm going to post this video today because I know I didn't post a single video last week, and I apologize. Okay, let's move on. So we've got our video, we've now created it. So you can actually see how Laravel did all that behind the scenes. All we had to do, set up our routes, create a form for it, and then it worked. We had our registration and everything is working. Now this thing is not working right now though is that, first of all, there's no indication that we've logged in. We don't know that. We don't really know how we're going to work with logged in users, which is what we're going to learn in this video. But we do know it's working, okay? And that's what I wanted to show you guys. Now let's come back and let's just to show a couple other things. We're gonna learn a little bit of the code in Laravel to show on screen if someone is logged in or not, and then we're going to and then we'll kind of go from there and test a few other things. So let's open up Sublime. And let's head on over to, I'm just going to add a line up here at the top, just temporarily, that says you're logged in or you're logged out, okay? And we're going to do that up here at the top, and I'm just going to do that in our main file, just so that every page has access to it. So let's come up here to our views. We're going to do this right on our view, and just go Resources, Views, and Main, okay? So in our main file, I'm going to come right above our content, just so that it shows up on every page. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create an if statement, okay? So actually we can do an if statement. We could do our if statement if we wanted with Blade. We'll do that. Okay, so we'll do if, and then we'll say if, and we're going to learn a few new things, and I'm going to go over this in just a second, but just follow along with me for now, and then I'm going to show you more of these little tricks. But we're going to do auth, check. Okay, so then we're going to do auth, check, and we got to do these parentheses here. And this is a method that we have built into Laravel that's part of the auth, this auth class that we're going to learn more about. But basically what this does is this will return true or false depending if the user is logged in or logged out. Okay, so if they're logged in, it'll return true, and if they're logged out, it'll return false. This makes it really easy for us to see if a user is logged in or logged out, and just with one quick little thing, and then we're going to output that to the page, and we're going to be able to see kind of the current status of someone in our application. And actually, I think because we're doing something really simple, I think what I'm going to do is just do a basic. We're just going to delete this real quick and do a basic, what I was going to do before. We're just going to do double brackets, and then we're going to do the same thing. We'll do auth check, and we'll do a ternary operator. So I'm just going to output logged in if it's true, because we know that this returns true if they're logged in. Okay, so we're going to output the text logged in, and if it's false, then we're going to return logged out, just like that. That's all we're going to do. And let's go ahead and just save this, and let's come back to our application. We're going to refresh. You can see that we're currently logged in. This means that when I registered for my account, we expect it to automatically log you in. It shows that someone's currently logged into the application. So now what I want to do is, how would you log out of the application? Well, you would obviously go to auth/logout, because if we come over here to our terminal, we can see PHP artisan route list, and we can see that we have a logout. Auth/logout is where we would log out of our application. So let's go ahead and do it. So we're going to come up to auth/logout, and we would expect it to say logged in. Now I actually remember that there's a gotcha that we forgot to do. So let's go ahead and There's a reason this isn't working, and we're going to go ahead and fix this so that you can actually log out. And in order to do this, we got to learn really quickly about something called middleware. Okay, so middleware this is the best representation that I can give you guys for what middleware is. So middleware, if you think about the life cycle of the application, when you send a request in, the request comes in towards your app, and then it's going to pass through these layers. Your app is this kind of core of what we're working on, and it's going to pass through these layers to get to your app, okay? And then in order to get out of your app and respond back to the user, it actually processes back through those exact same layers on the way out, okay? So middleware is that thing that kind of surrounds our application, and we pass through the middleware on the way in, we pass out of the middleware on the way out, so it's something that's basically all around our application. Now you can create your own middleware, middlewares is what we call them. You can create your own middlewares if you'd like, to do all sorts of things if you want to make sure that something happens either before or after or both during the life cycle of an application or during that request life cycle, okay? And so there are obviously some built-in Laravel middlewares that we use all the time. One of these is the session that you can see here. So we pass through to see if you currently have a session. Well, if you currently have a session, you might have cookies that we might need to look at. You might have CSRF tokens. You might also have maybe a Remember Me token or something like that that we need to pass into the authentication. So that session, and there's a lot of other things that happen too, but those are some of the things that would happen in that session middleware. So every time you send out a request to our Laravel server, you're going to pass through that session middleware before you ever get to the application. Now the application is where the controllers sit, the models sit, all that kind of stuff. So before you ever get to the controller, you've got to pass through this middleware, okay? On the flip side, after the information is processed in the application, on the way out, we also pass through the middleware once again, okay? Just like we did on the way in. So this allows us to do different things on the way in and out of an application to ensure security a lot of times, or just better user experience and things like that. And a lot of times it's just to simplify our code. So that's what this middleware is all about. Now, why am I explaining middleware for you right now? Well, it's because authentication is at the core of middleware. Authentication is literally middleware at its very definition. If you think about authentication, we need to do certain things on the way into our application. We don't want to process anything in the model or the controller if someone's not authenticated or allowed to do that type of action. And so that's why it's really important to have these middleware layers. These used to be called filters, but you have these layers to your application that the request must pass through before we ever get to the controller. And that allows us to protect the actions that we create in our controller. Okay, so as you can see here, the authentication is that layer inside of the application where we pass through it, and that's what I want to talk about right now, because if we come back to our application, you can see that, let's come back actually to Sublime to take a look at it, and let's take a look at the authentication controller. So we're going to go under App, HTTP, Controllers, Auth, and Auth Controller, okay? So this is our authentication controller. And you can see down here, if we just come down to this construct, you can see that we actually are accessing our middleware. This is where we assign the middleware to this controller, okay? And so we can tell it which of those layers of our application that it needs to pass through or pass through when it comes in or out of our application, okay? So what we're saying is that inside of this controller, you need to use the guest middleware. Okay, and we can have multiple, going on a little more about middleware real quick. You can have as many middlewares as you want. Just because you create the middleware doesn't mean that every request is going to go in or out of that middleware. You have to actually identify it through the controller usually, or you can do it in the routes file as well. The best way to do it is in the controller. And so here in the controller, what we're doing is we're using our construct. You guys should know if you know PHP already. This is basically the init function if you're using Python or Ruby or something, a construct in PHP. It just means that every time we instantiate anything in this controller, we have to use the constructor. It's like the parent of the class. Okay, so every time we do create an object, every time we access this controller, we create this, we go through this construct, okay? So that we can put whatever we want. If we want to make sure that something gets accessed across this entire controller, we put it in the construct, okay? So that's why we're doing the middleware. We're saying, hey, everything in this middleware, everything in this controller, we want to go use this middleware, and that's what we're setting up right here. We can set the name of the middleware. We could have multiple middlewares if we want. In this case, we just have the guest one. We just have one of them, but we could do multiple if we wanted. So we're saying pass through this guest middleware. And then there is also a caveat here. It says accept logout. And the logout doesn't have, it's basically, this is saying, hey, every single function in here, the validator function, there's the login function, everything, we need to make sure that it passes through the guest middleware. And the only one that we don't want it to do that is going to be the logout. The logout action is the only one that we don't want to pass through this middleware, okay? So that's what this is saying. Okay, so what is the guest middleware, you're going to ask? Well, the guest middleware basically is saying that as you pass through the guest middleware just checks to see if you are a guest in the application or if you are not. Okay, so what we're doing is basically saying everything in this controller, you need to be a guest or you need to be logged out in order to access. That's what this guest middleware means. Okay, so if you think about it, if you go to the login page, which is part of this controller, the login, in order to use the login page, we want you to be logged out. Does that make sense? I mean, we don't want someone logged in to go to the login page. It just wouldn't make sense because they're already logged in. So if you're logged in and you try to go to the login page already, if you're already logged in and you try to go to that login page again, you're going to pass through the guest middleware. That guest middleware is going to say, oh, you're not a guest, and it's going to redirect you out of that login so that you never have access to the login while you're already a user logged into the application currently. Now, if you're logged out and you go to that login, you're going to pass through the middleware. It's going to show that you're a guest, that you're not logged in, or you're a guest. It's going to let you then pass through to the application and then actually process that login request and so forth, okay? So that's what the guest middleware is. There's another layer of middleware that's the opposite of guest, and that's called auth. Okay, so if you wanted to make sure that your application was protected and no one was allowed to use it other than people logged in, then you would set it through the middleware called auth, the auth middleware. And auth just stands for authenticated, and that means that everyone passing through that middleware needs to be authenticated. If they are not authenticated, or if they're a guest, then it would reject them and not let them into the into that controller that they're going into. Okay, so you can use these two different middlewares to ensure that certain things are protected and only guests have access to them, or certain things are protected and only authenticated users have access to them. It's really up to you and then the needs of your application. Now, in this case, we're actually making sure that it's only guests that go into these controller actions because we don't want logged in users going to our login page or our register page or something like that. However, one exception to that is the log out page, and that's why you see this little line of code here. If you're going into the log out page, we don't want guests going into the log out page because they're not logged in. We can't log someone out if they're not logged in to begin with. And so that's why we're making sure that they're not a guest. And if you're not a guest, then that means you have to be logged in, right? You're one or the other. You can't be neither, if that makes sense as well. Okay, so if you're not logged in, then you're a guest. If you are logged in, then you'll fall under, the auth. Okay, so you're going to be in one category or the other. So by just saying, hey, they're not a guest, then we can ensure that they are therefore logged in. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. So if you're logged in, then we'll let you log out. Okay, now the one problem that we see with this, and this I think is a bug with Laravel, I'm not sure. To me, it seems like a bug, but basically the built-in routes here, if we go to our routes file, the built-in routes for authentication are, or for the logout is auth/logout. And I don't know why, oh, and then, I'm sorry, the controller is getLogout, is the controller that you need to use. And this is something that's just built into Laravel. This is what you have to do to get all the magical stuff that I just showed you to automatically work. You have to use this getLogout, post login, get login, and stuff like that. So I don't know if this is a bug or if I'm maybe just missing something. If you guys do know the answer to this question, comment it below because I'd love to know the answer. But for some reason, this logout is here by default, but it actually expects a get logout. So what we need to do is change this so that we're going to change this logout to be get logout, because that's what's happening up here. Is when we go to our /logout, it actually is redirecting us because we're not currently a guest. Because we're logged in, it won't let us access that logout page because it thinks we're a guest. Now, hopefully, the idea here is that there would be this exception, and meaning, like the logout page right now has the exception that we don't have to pass through the guest, and therefore we could log out. But the problem is that logout doesn't exist. We only have get logout. So what I want to do here is we're just going to change this to get logout. This will match now the the current setup of our application, and now it should let us log out because we won't be considered a guest, and so it'll let us process that. So let's try it again. I'm just going to refresh this home page. We're going to go to auth/logout, and now you can see that nothing really happened. It just redirected us because we don't have a view for logout, but you can see that, you can see now that we have changed to logout. Okay, so we're now logged out. There's no one in this application. Now that we're logged out, let's go ahead and try our login. We're going to go to auth/login, and we get our little login form. You can see we're currently logged out. If we were logged in, it wouldn't let us access this page. And let's go now to, let's go ahead and log in. So I'm going to log in with the same credentials I used last time, or that I just set up. We're going to click login. You can see I'm logged in now. So everything seems to be working. I'm currently logged in. Now if I go to, say, register, it should boot me out of register. Because I'm logged in, I'm not allowed to go to register. Sure enough, it just kicks us right back here. Won't let us go to register because I'm currently logged in. Now let's come back. We're going to log out. You can see we're logged out. And now since I'm logged out, I should be able to go to register and I could create a new user account. Okay? So everything seems to be working the way we want it to work. The only thing we really want to do at this point is we're going to want to protect our posts page. I'm currently logged out, but I'm allowed to access all these post pages. So what do we do with that? Well, it's going to be middleware. We already learned about middleware, and that's what we're going to use to protect this. Now, if you remember several videos ago, I kind of prepped you guys for this, and I said, hey, the easiest way to lock down your application is with middleware, obviously, and to do something exactly like this construct method. We can actually say, hey, everything in this controller we want to protect under this layer of middleware. And so what we set up is our PostController. We decided nothing in the PostController is going to be accessible to guests, right? The index page is what we're looking at right here. This is the index page. We want this only to be for logged in users to see. We only want the create method to create a new post, only logged in users. Obviously to save the post and to show that post, edit the post, and then delete the post. All that stuff is only for logged in users to do. We created another controller called the blog controller, and this one's guests can access this one because this is just showing the page to the public, right? Okay, so let's come back to our post controller and let's lock down this post controller so that only logged in users can access the post controller. So what we're going to do is we're going to come to the top of our class, we're going to type public function, and we're going to do that construct, okay? So we're going to set up our construct, and then inside of our construct, we're going to set our middleware. So we're going to do this and middleware, and then our middleware that we can set is going to be called auth. Now, we talked about this just barely, but auth means that only authenticated users can access these pages. Those only authenticated users. If we set it to guest, it would mean only guests can access these features, okay? So we want only authenticated users to access it, so we're going to do the auth middleware. And just real quick, you can actually just check the spelling. You can check how this works by just looking right here. You can see that we're just replicating this exact same thing here. Now, if we wanted to do something like accept and make sure we could allow a couple of these methods to not go through the authentication, we could do that. And that's what I was saying earlier, is if you want, just because you have a couple methods in here that aren't going to be locked down by your authentication, that's okay. You would just set up, a second parameter here, and you would just create an array and just do except. Or you could also do only if you wanted only one of them, which wouldn't really make sense to do in our construct, but you could also do that as well. Okay, so this is going to say everything in this controller is protected by middleware. So now let's save this and test it out. Saving this application, I'm going to go just refresh real quick, and I think we're getting our first little error, but let's deal with it first. Okay, so I'm at the home page. We're logged out. I can access the blog because the blog's not locked down. The about page isn't locked down. Everything's working because I'm logged out. But when I come to posts, you can see it doesn't let me access posts. I'm getting an error. And let's go ahead and just log in real fast. And it's auth/login. Let me just go ahead and log in real quick and we'll test it again. hello@jacurtis.com, and then I'm going to type my password. Now you can see that I'm logged in, so we should be able to access our posts, which is what we're seeing right here. So it is correctly working for the most part, right? It is locking down that post application. I can't go to anything. Let's see, what's our URL for this? Let's just copy this URL and then let's log out and try to access this URL again. Like that. Now I can't access that URL because I'm logged out, okay? So everything's working the way we want except for this error, obviously. Well, let's take a look at what this error is. You guys will recognize this error. This is our not found HTTP exception. The not found HTTP exception is when we don't have a route, when Laravel can't find the route you're looking for. You get this not found HTTP exception. So that we already know what this error means. And that makes sense because if you look up here, you can see it redirected us to login instead of auth/login, okay? So this is, again, another thing that I swear is just another bug in Laravel. I don't understand it. This is exactly the same problem we had before. It seems like when they were developing Laravel, they started using, building the authentication system using the URL structure of /auth/login and /auth/logout. And then when they were working on it again later, they just decided to do /login and /logout. It's another weird bug in Laravel that again, if anyone knows the answer to it, to why this is, I'd love to hear an explanation in the comments, and I would love to understand it because I personally don't understand why it is. I think it's a bug. I genuinely think it's a bug. But anyway, I'm going to show you how to fix it so that we can move forward even if it is a bug. So basically what's happening here is when we go to our posts, we pass through our middleware. It says, oh, Alex is not logged in. Redirect him to the login page so he can log in. That's the correct functionality we want. The only problem is it thinks that the login page is at /login instead of being at /auth/login, okay? So that's the only difference. Everything else is working. It still knows we're not logged in and it wants us to log in. It just doesn't seem to know where the login page is, okay? And that seems to be the problem. So all we're going to do is tell it where the login page is. So let's come back over to Sublime. Okay, now to solve this bug, tell Laravel there's a different login page than what it thinks there is. We just need to edit the middleware. And this will be a good introduction for those of you guys looking at learning a little bit more about middleware. So if we're here in our controller, I mentioned that every time we use that middleware, we pass through an auth middleware. Okay, well, auth middleware is saved under the authentication middleware class. And that is where the actual redirect happens, is inside the middleware, not inside of the controller or anything like that. So if we go to our middleware, we can change that redirect path and then have it sending us to the correct place. So let's go ahead and do that. So if you're actually in here, you're already in your controllers. That means that we're inside of this HTTP folder, right? Just like this. So we're inside this HTTP folder, and then we're looking in our controllers. If you just look at the folder, underneath controllers is a middleware folder. And inside this middleware folder, you should see your authenticate.php, and this is what handles the auth filter, okay? So every time we authenticate a user, we pass through this filter, this middleware. They used to call them filters, now it's called middleware. They pass through the middleware, and this is where we actually authenticate a user. So both the guest and the auth middleware are both just they both just use this exact same thing. The only difference is basically when you use guest, you're checking if authenticate is not true, and when you're using the auth middleware, you're checking to see if it is true. But they're both basically the exact same thing. So this is where it all happens. This is the magic behind it. So you can actually take a look at some of the source code here, and you can see that we're protecting this against guest. If this is an AJAX request, we'll just send a 401 request if they're not allowed to come in. If it's not an AJAX request, that means it's actually a web request, like what we're working on, where you're actually on the web in the web browser. Then you would come under this else statement, and it would just redirect you to the login form as a guest. So what we can do here is we can just change this to say /auth/login, just like that, and then save this middleware. And now come back to our application. Let's come back to our home page, and now we should everything should redirect us to the correct place because we've actually changed the middleware. So whenever we pass through the middleware and we fail that test because we're logged out, then it will actually send us to the auth/login instead of just /login. Okay, so let's come on over to my account. We're going to test it. Sure enough, now we're not logged in. It knows that we're not logged in, so that's why it's sending us to the login form so that we can log in. And now we're actually seeing the correct form, and you can see it passed us up to auth/login. Okay, so you guys have kind of seen in this video now how to work with middleware. So that's really, really cool. We did a little bit of editing of our middleware and stuff like that. So now, before we finish up, I just want to show you a couple other things you can use to kind of manage your authenticating users and some other helpful tips you might have. We're going to use a couple of these in the next video, where in the next video we're going to kind of edit this a little bit so that this button up here is going to be a login button when you're logged out. And when you're logged in, it's actually going to show my account and have your posts and stuff like that. So that's what we're working on in the next video, and we're going to use a few of these helpful things in the next video. Okay, so this is just some of the source code I took straight out of the Laravel source code, and I just want to show you what's possible because I actually haven't seen a page that kind of congregates all of this stuff together. So I actually, in order to learn some of these things, I literally had to dig through the source code in order to find them. So I just wanted to show you some of the stuff you can do while you're working with your application. So what you could do, for example here, is if you just want to see if someone's logged in or not, and we learned this one in our, when we did the logged in, logged out text at the top of the view, we did auth check. This just returns true or false depending on if you're logged in or logged out. It allows you to see if someone's logged in or logged out. And this is really good with menus. So you can see, again, in the next video, we're going to check to see if someone's logged in. If they're logged in, we're going to show a different menu than if they're logged out. So that's kind of one way. You would not use this, however, to actually protect your files, okay? That's best handled in the middleware because that, if it happens in the middleware, that means it's actually checking before it ever gets to the controller, okay? So it's much earlier on the request. But this is good for like visual changes and just stuff like that. If you're changing text for logged in users, things like that, it's good to check if someone's logged in. You can do that with auth check. Another thing you can do is you can see if someone's a guest. Again, this isn't middleware. This is actually, you can do auth guest, and it's the opposite of auth check. Okay, so auth check returns true if they're logged in and false if they're logged out. That's what we just looked at. This one is the exact same thing but the opposite. So it returns true if they're logged out and false if they're logged in. So it just depends. If you're creating an if statement and your main concern is if they're logged out, then you could use auth guest. And if your main concern is if they're logged in, you could use auth check. It's the same thing though. All right, so that's another one you could use. If you want to actually get the user's information out of the database, you can use auth user. And what auth user will do is it'll actually return a like an eloquent object where you could actually access the name of the user, the created at date, just stuff like that. You can actually access that user's information, or maybe even their ID number or their ID in the database or something like that by just doing auth user. Okay. The next one is very similar to that, but it allows you to just get the ID number. This is really common if you want to redirect to someone's ID page or you want to log their ID number for the ID is going to be the number, that's their primary ID in the database. So if you want to log their primary ID in some sort of history file to make sure to show that they had access to that or something, you can actually just grab the currently logged in user's ID number by just doing auth ID, just like you see here, okay? And if you do that, it'll return an integer that has the user's ID number. So that's a really helpful one. I use that quite a bit. If you actually want to manually log someone in, you want to attempt to log them in, you would use the attempt command, okay? You need to pass in a few parameters. The first one is going to be an array of all the credentials. So you'll pass in the username and the password as credentials. And then you can pass in some optional stuff here. You could pass in a true or false if you want them to be a remember me token. And then the last one is if you want to log them in after doing this, you would just do true or false. The default's true, because I don't know why you would do it otherwise. But you could, I guess, verify their credentials and not log them in if you just wanted to do something like that. And in that case, you would put the last parameter set to false. Okay. This one is once. So auth once allows you to log someone in for just one request. It's kind of like a flash session, except that I honestly don't know why you would use this, but I'm sure there are use cases for it. I just have never ran across one myself. But if you wanted to log someone in and just you basically want to authenticate them for the one single request, you could just do auth once. That'll authenticate them, make sure they're valid for this one request. And remember that this is different than Remember Me. Remember Me it remembers users across multiple sessions, okay? So after they leave the web page and then they come back, then the Remember Me kicks in. The default authentication will remember people across a single session, which is across multiple pages but in the same visit. That's the default. So if you don't click Remember Me, you're still going to be logged in across multiple pages in that same visit. It's only when you leave the web page and come back that it's going to forget you. Auth once is like even more specific than that. It's saying I'm only going to remember you for the next page request. After that, you're not going to be logged in anymore. Okay, so that's what auth once is. Auth once is basically the same thing as the previous one. Auth attempt, you just pass in the credentials, it validates them, and then logs them in. If you want to log in a user via their user ID, if you had someone's user ID, you could just log in via that ID and then you basically logged into the session via that. This is a major security thing because you're not checking for passwords or anything like that. So you need to do something else here, but you could log someone in using their primary ID if you wanted to do that. And then you could also do the exact same thing. If you had their primary ID and you wanted to log them in for just one request, you could do that. That's a more reasonable command, in my opinion. Make sure, though, when you're using this is not replacing any sort of like authentication, really. This is going to be for a very specific use case. You need to make sure the person is allowed to see whatever information is here because you're not validating any sort of passwords or anything. You're just logging them in manually by an ID number. This one actually just tells you whether they previously logged in under the Remember. Okay, so if you wanted to see if they, this is really good for actually very secure applications. If you, so for example, let's say someone, you've got like to change a password or something and you were going to the change a password page. Well, it might be a good idea to make someone re-log in for their password if they haven't logged in a while. So while they might have automatically been able to log into your application because they had logged in on a previous session, if they're just doing something like changing their password, changing their accessing their credit card information or something like that, you may want to use this method to check if they logged in via Remember or if they actually or not, because if they didn't log in via Remember, then you can assume they just barely typed in their password during this session to start this session. If they logged in via Remember, then you could assume that it's possible they've logged in, well actually therefore they logged in a previous session and you just initiated the session based on that Remember token. Now normally that would be okay, but with something as significant as viewing a credit card information or as significant as changing your password, that's not a good way to do it. And so you might want to check if they logged in via Remember, and then if they did, you may just want to ask them to re-log in and type their password in before you do something very secure like that. The reason for that is someone could, let's say you logged in and in a previous session, even at home or somewhere else at school, you left, someone else comes in, they were automatically logged into your account because you never logged out, even in a previous session. Now they can change crazy stuff. So sometimes it's good to see if they logged in via remember and add another layer of security. The last thing I'm going to show you is just how to log someone out. Logging someone out is really easy. You just do auth log out. That's all you got to do. It'll log someone out and you'll be done. Okay? So that basically finishes up what we've got in this video. Again, in the next video, we're going to actually just kind of tweak everything a little bit, just create a better user experience and stuff like that for our authentication, and then we can move on to password resets and stuff like that. But we've basically got the skeleton of our authentication complete. So good work today, guys. I know there's a lot of information coming through, but you can see how easy it is to work with authentication. I spent a lot of time talking with you, but if we actually cut out the talking moments, you can see that you can actually, with Laravel, get an authentication system set up in like 10 minutes or less, which is pretty incredible. Normally, authentication systems take much longer than that, but Laravel does a lot of this behind the scenes, has a lot of really helpful functions like we just learned, and stuff like that. So thanks everyone for your support. Again, if you have any questions, reach out to me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is _JACurtis. You can see that here. Also, you can email me if you have any other questions or anything private or any other concerns you want to ask me about. It's hello@jacurtis.com, basic email there. And if you haven't already subscribed, I've got lots more videos coming out. We're wrapping up this tutorial series, but I'm actually really excited to finish up this series because I have a long laundry list of fun applications that we can do that are honestly going to be even better than this series. So if you liked this series, you're going to definitely like what's coming up. Please subscribe. I appreciate the support, everyone. I'll see you guys in the next video.